a tremendous, tremendous influence, almost control of the United States government. Again, most people don't realize that, and if you mention this in public, you're going to be accused as some sort of conspiracist. But it's a fact, and I'll get to that in a moment. The next is the Socialist European faction, made up of most of Europe. This group is highly socialistic. They are competing with the Anglo-American faction in a way in which they hope to predominate in the emerging one world government. They want to be on top, and they are doing all that they can to stop the Anglo-American faction in whatever they do. That's one of the reasons that you see France and Germany primarily opposing us on so many of the international issues, because they are the leaders of the European Socialist group, and they are the ones that are trying to undermine the United States and Great Britain at every turn. Most people are not aware of this, although they have seen it in the issues of Iraq. When they've not supported us in Iraq, France has actually formed an allegiance with Saddam Hussein, act financial allegiance and so forth, and as a consequence are doing things in which they are trying to undermine the United States of America. The Russian faction is another. The Russian Federation is a united group of leftover of the Soviet Union that is grouping now to form a union not unlike the European Union, in which they will be an economic competitor with the rest of the world. They've got a long ways to go, but they are trying to do everything they can to undermine the Anglo-American faction and have actually joined forces with the Socialist Europeans on many, many cases. The Chinese faction is yet another one. The Chinese faction acts more like a spoiler in many events, trying to gain world dominance. That is their goal. They want to be on top when this world government emerges as the masters. They've got a long ways to go. It's not likely they can do that because they're so fractured. Their economy is teetering on disaster right now with the banking problems that they have. But nonetheless, they are trying everything they can do to undermine the Anglo-American faction. The Islam faction is yet a fifth one. They are the ones that came roaring onto the scenes on September 11th, 2001. They've actually been around much longer than that, but most people were totally unaware of them until September 11th, or 9/11 as we call it. Most people are unaware that the Saudi families have been supporting these kinds of terrorists for many, many years. In fact, they have to be, in the tunes of billions of dollars. Most people have no concept that the Saudis, the very rich Saudis and other rich Arab nations are doing all they can to support these terrorists to undermine the United States, Great Britain, and Europe. It's an amazing thing. Now, not everyone is doing that, understand, but yet these people, these terrorists have to get their money from somewhere, and it's coming from the coffers of these oil-rich nations. Primarily, again, to design and destabilize the Western world. And I want to refer to a book written by historian Carroll Quigley back in 1966. Carroll Quigley was one of the foremost historians of the 20th century. His record, his credentials are impeccable, and as a consequence, he is an excellent source. And he describes all the international intrigue and so forth going on for the past 60 to 80 years prior to that. On page 950, for instance, he says this: "There does exist an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the Communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Roundtable groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the Communists or any other groups, and frequently does so." So we have here an admission on his part that there is a group out there that acts pretty much like the Communists do. In fact, they actually supported the Communists for the 72 years that they were in existence. And as a result of this, they are both working within the United States and without the United States to create tension in the world in which they can then thrive and operate. He goes on to say on the same page, "I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records." So he's in the know. He's actually done the research. You can't question what he's saying unless he's outright lying. He goes on to say, "I have no aversion to it are to most of its aims, and have, for much of my life, been close to it and so many of its instruments. In other words, what he is saying is he's studied in depth, he's been allowed to look at the records, he knows what he's talking about, and he agrees with it. And yet, he comes out with this book actually spelling out exactly what's going on. On page 324, he goes on to say, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalistic fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements. In other words, there is an agenda out there to control the world, and the head of it are these banks. And the other power factions of the world are vying to destabilize that and carve out a niche for themselves, if not come on top of the pile. Hence, the clay mixed with iron. It will never be a fully stable government, even though it is all powerful, because you have internal parties that are vying for power. It's as simple as that. Goes on to say the apex of the system was to be in the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world central banks, which were themselves private corporations. So it's all controlled out of the Bank of International Settlements. And remember, I just told you that the Federal Reserve, the United States Federal Reserve, and the Bank of England control at least 1/2 of the actual monetary flow in the world each day. So those two dominate. In fact, it's the Federal Reserve that dominates the most. Even though they don't control the most cash flow, they still dominate, probably in most respects, the rest of the central banks of the world. Also, there have been a number, and I'm not going to have time to get into them. I do have other videos that you can watch to see how this happens. But they also have had numerous meetings through the United Nations to centralize more and more and more and more control in the Bank of International Settlements. How does this come about? I don't have time to go through everything, but remember that all through the Old Testament there were numerous examples of pantheistic religions, Baalism and so forth, that dominated that particular culture. There were hundreds and hundreds of these, but they all have had one thing in common, and that is pantheism. Basically bringing together Western mysticism and Eastern mysticism in what is called Freemasonry. Most Masons have no idea that their organization is involved in the occult. Basically being derived from theosophy. I'm going to be talking about theosophy in a minute. Suffice it to say right now that Freemasonry has been the vehicle by which this has been transmitted throughout the world. Now again, I would say probably 99% of the Freemasons have no idea that this is happening. And that's one of the problems you get into when you actually belong to a secret organization, is that there is information withheld from you as you go from one level to another level to another level until you finally reach the enlightened stage. Now how does this happen? Let's go on. In The Secret Doctrine, which was written by Madame Helena Blavatsky, lays out this New Age concept. It's the New Age Bible in many respects. And she goes on to state that every dogmatic religion, preeminently the Christian, points out that Satan is the enemy of God. Now, there's no question if you look at the Bible that this is what the Bible says, that Satan is the arch enemy. Now listen to what she says. In reality, Satan is the highest divine spirit, the occult wisdom on earth. In other words, she's basically saying that Satan is truly God, the God of light. Thus, the Christian church is intolerant, bigoted, and cruel to all who do not choose to believe it as slaves. Both these churches, Catholic and Protestant, are fighting against the divine truth. She basically says that Satan has the truth, not God as revealed through the Bible. When repudiating and slandering the dragon of esoteric wisdom, i.e. Satan, they, the Christian churches, are moved by the spirit of dark fanaticism. Now we're going to see in a moment how this is being translated into geopolitics. In fact, Hitler himself in Germany in World War II was a devout student of Blavatsky. And it was through her works, her writings, that he decided that the Jews had to be obliterated in order to usher in his millennium kingdom. And as a consequence, what he has looked at in many respects is the fact that